welcome to another episode of the MMA Lotcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. This week, we're going over UFC Vegas 37, headlined by Ryan Spann and Anthony Smith in a light heavyweight fight. The first ever appearance for Ryan Spann in a main event, whereas Anthony Smith has pretty much been doing this for every other fight night at this point in time. But interested to see how Spann looks, especially on this stage, on this platform, and if he makes any improvements from what we've seen in the past, because I just, you guys will hear it in my breakdown here, but I don't have too high of a ceiling for him. Interesting card all around. We got 15 fights. We had a couple that dropped off, but we did get quick replacements for them, so we're still at 15 fights at this point in time. The most recent one was Dakota Bush falling out due to a COVID situation, and in steps Brandon Jennings, former PFL fighter from a couple weeks ago, who scored a beautiful flying knee knockout over former UFC fighter Jacob Kilburn. He's taking on Rong, obviously, but a ton of other great fights on the card. Montel Jackson versus JP Bays, Armand Tsarukyan going up against Christos Giagos. Even the co-main event, Iwan Cutelaba versus Devin Clark, could be some fun as well. What do we got? Gustav Lopez versus Haile Alateng should be a fun fight. Nate Maness versus Tony Gravely should be a great fight. Even Nicholas Motta versus Cameron VanCamp, both UFC newcomers, but that should be a fun scrap as well. And obviously Ariane Lipski versus Manny Bohm. Again, Manny Bohm, UFC debut, but should bring a pretty entertaining style to the cage, and going up against the violence queen, we should see some violence in that fight. So I'm very much looking forward to this entire card. Again, 15 fights, give it to me, inject it into my veins. I'm here for it all day. Before we get any further into this, though, let's go over the UFC Vegas 36 betting recap. And this was the first ever card that I never, or at least UFC card, that I never had a lock of the night play. And that is something that, don't be surprised if you see more of that in the future, because I've finally gotten to the point where I'm like, why do I need to have a lock of the night play for every single card? It's nice to say that, but I don't want to push myself or force myself to make a large bet if I don't feel comfortable with it. And I just did not feel comfortable with it for the last event. I did end up going with my biggest play. It was a 2-unit play on Marc-Andre Barriault. Could have been a lock of the night play considering how the fight ended up going, but that knockout power of Dalcho was just a little bit too much of a concern for me. But Marc-Andre Barriault went out there and did the damn thing. We cashed that play minus 175 for a profit of 1.14 units. Our dog of the night play was only a half-unit play on Sergey Spivak. He ends up getting knocked out by Tom Aspinall near the ending of that first round. I'm still out here disrespecting Tom Aspinall, but I look forward to his future opponents and maybe another more reliable guy that should be able to go out there and give Tom Aspinall some issues, push him into the second and third rounds, and see how he goes. But Tom is slowly, winning me over as a person, as a fighter. But I do have question marks about his cardio and what he looks like later in fight. So if he can fight a fighter that actually has some durability, can make it past that first round, then I will be more intrigued to possibly fade him in the future at a big plus number. So all in all, we end up plus 0.64 units on the night. Very small night for me, but I'm glad to end up in the profit there. But we got a 15 fight slate coming up here, and I haven't posted anything on the Patreon yet in terms of my lock of the night or dog of the night play. That is still to come, but I've already posted the best bets and props article up there. I will be posting the prize picks tips very shortly, and then we're off to the races for the fights this weekend. I won't be having much on Bellator. I'll probably do a best bets and props article just for the main card over there. So if you guys are interested in Bellator stuff, that is all just going to be on the Patreon there. So make sure you guys go check that out. And like I said, big card this weekend. Check out the Patreon to get some exclusive stuff on that. Obviously, the Discord is a great community as well for the Patreon. A lot of people enjoy it over there. That alone is worth the $5 a month. So make sure you guys check out the Patreon. Link is in the description below. Secondly, as always, giving a shout out to Coolbet, coolbet.com. Promo code use MMALOTN2. That's the number 2. And they'll match your initial deposit up to $200 on your initial deposit. Like I said, I'm a little bit redundant today. Maybe a little bit off my game considering it's been 2 weeks since I've recorded one of these podcasts. But yeah, make sure you guys check out Coolbet, coolbet.com. Promo code MMALOTN2. They allow you to parlay props. They got a lot of different props. They got a lot of different odds as well. Very good odds on a lot of fights as well. So make sure you guys keep your eyes peeled for Coolbet. And they're definitely on the come up. I believe that slowly, month by month, they're starting to open up in more and more sites, or more and more countries, more and more regions. So if they weren't a part of your region in the past, past, they might be now. So make sure you guys keep your eyes peeled for that. All right, that's pretty much a wrap on the intros here. Yeah, nothing else to plug. Let's just get right into the podcast. Let's stop dilly-dallying. Let's get into the podcast, and then I'll see you guys on the other side. Emily Whitmire versus Hannah Goldy. We got minus 120 on Whitmire and plus 100 on the returning Hannah Goldy, who's actually, quickly returning, I should say. She fought a couple weeks ago, actually, against Diana Belbita and ended up coming up short in that fight. But prior to that, she had been out of the cage for a very long time. So it's very good to see her try to get back in the cage and try to make up for lost time, because at 29 years old and only 7 fights into her professional MMA career, she has some room to grow and some time to make up, especially if she wants to make a run at this 125-pound division. Actually, I'm just want to make sure it is 125 pounds, because I do believe Goldy used to be a 115er, and she has decided to move up. It could also be due to this fight being short notice for her, and she would not be able to cut the entire 115 pounds. Yeah, so she used to fight at 115. This fight is now taking place at 125. I believe even Whitmire as well. Her last fight was at 115, and her scheduled fight against, I believe it was Corey McKenna, that was scheduled to be at 115 as well. But given the short nature of this fight, I'm sure they're more than willing to give Hannah Goldy those extra 10 pounds just so that they could actually have a fight here. So size-wise, I don't think it's going to be massive in terms of a difference here. We got 5'5" for Emily Whitmire, 5'4" for Hannah Goldy, 63-inch for Whitmire, and 61-inch for Goldy. So Goldy's style normally is to be on the outside and, kind of just use her range striking, her movement, kind of to outpoint her opponents. That's what she looks to do more often than not. Emily Whitmire, on the other hand, she is, pretty much Spitfire. She goes out there and tries to just, finish her opponents. The Alexandra Albu fight, she was able to get her out there in just about a minute. The Amanda Kibos fight, she got absolutely dominated in that fight in the grappling realm. And that was very interesting, as Amanda Kibos was a plus 155 underdog there, and not a lot of people knew what she had to bring to the table at that point in time. But that was definitely her coming out party. And then the Poliana Vienna fight, Emily Whitmire gets tied up there and then quickly gets subbed quickly thereafter. The Jamie Moyle fight was probably her best performance to date in terms of a full performance, right? Staying at range, not really letting Jamie Moyle get in on the inside and get too much going, and was able to really, bust her up from the outside. But again, I don't really rate Jamie Moyle that highly, and I think she's more of a wrestler than she is a striker, which is why she found as much issues as she did in that fight. Hannah Goldy has interestingly been working a lot with Marina Shafir and Jillian Robertson in the lead up to this fight, and I do believe that we should see a little bit more of a lean towards the grapple heavy approach from Hannah Goldy here, especially if she wants to kind of corral Emily Whitmire and get her to the ground and try to beat her that way. Whitmire does have a sneaky submission game, so that's something that Goldy's going to have to worry about. But I do think that if Whitmire goes out there and tries to replicate that Jamie Moyle fight, where she just stays at distance and try to pop her head back, Hannah Goldy is going to close the distance, try to push her up against the cage and drag her to the ground. And Goldy in her last fight against Belbita, pretty much the entire 15 minutes, Belbita stayed at range and beat Hannah Goldy up from there, landing the much more significant strikes. But it was like the last 20 or 30 seconds of the fight where Goldy actually finally got the fight to the ground and had tremendous success there. I'd be surprised if she doesn't look to do the same thing here against Emily Whitmire, right? Maybe use her striking for a little bit to kind of tire out Whitmire and then go to the grappling a little bit later, because she should definitely be the stronger fighter. But hopefully her submission defense is good enough that she should be able to stay out of the way of any submissions coming her way from Emily Whitmire in this spot. I do think she'll drag her to the ground at certain points. I do think that Goldy will really grind on her here, output her from in the striking realm, and then really have some good success in terms of the grappling, clinching, dragging her to the ground, and just doing some good work from on top. So I am actually going to go with Goldy here. Not the biggest confidence, but I will take her to win this fight. Again, I think she's going to put together a much more complete performance than Whitmire, and also given Whitmire's lack of activity over the last several years as well, that's a little bit of a concern. So I'm interested to see what she looks like now that she's coming back. But I do think that this is a tough matchup for her to go out there and try to fight a girl like Hannah Goldy on short notice here. So I am going Hannah Goldy, and I'm going to take her to win this fight via decision. Alateng versus Gustavo Lopez. We got minus 125 on the Chinese fighter Alateng and plus 105 for Gustavo Lopez. Now, I'm very interested to see how this fight goes down, as I think both guys bring similar traits to the table here. However, I think the advantage is actually going to be with Alateng in regards to his cleaner, crisper, and more aggressive style of striking. Gustavo Lopez, a little bit more, wild and uses wild winging and looping hooks for his striking whenever he does close the distance and try to get his shots off, compared to Alateng, who's a little bit more disciplined in his approach with his striking, is aggressive as well, and uses combinations very well. I think both these guys have a decent wrestling background. I think Gustavo Lopez actually has a very underrated wrestling background, but I do think that it will get nullified here, and we should get mainly a striking fight in the scrap. I would be surprised if anybody has major or significant grappling success over the other guy, as I do think that they kind of canceled each other out. I do think, though, it will come down to the striking, and if that's the case, it will be a highly Alateng fight, as he did actually switch up his training camp, went down there to fight ready, and I do believe my guy Eddie Chaw will have him more than ready to go for this fight. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not a case of just because I had Eddie Chaw on my show the other week, or, even if I ever have James Krause fighters that I'm betting on or predicting or something like that, I will never put bias into this. I will never go into a fight and be like, I'm picking this guy because he's Eddie Chaw's guy, or I'm picking this guy because he's James Krause's guy, just because I've built a bit of a friendship with those guys. That's not what it is at all. I do think that they did some really good things, a fight ready. I do think that they've done very solid work with Alateng, and I think we'll definitely see the fruits of his labor this weekend, going up against a guy like Gustavo Lopez, who was a little bit more of a rudimentary approach with his striking style. Like I said, wild winging hooks, looping hooks, really leaves us opening in terms of allowing the fighters to counter straight through the middle, right down the pipe, and I do think we'll see a lot of that from Alateng this weekend. Lopez, he showed really good work in the Anthony Burchak fight, where he was able to mix up takedowns and, land takedowns and really mix up the fight. He did that a lot in his regional scene as well. Obviously, he's 1-2 in the UFC right now, but losses to Merab Dvalishvili and Adrian Yanez are nothing to hold your head about. I do think that Lopez has a decent game. However, I just think his striking is just going to be a little bit behind what Alateng will be bringing to the table here. So I'm taking Alateng. I think it should be a fun fight. I think it should be somewhat back and forth, but I do think that we'll start to see Alateng pull away with his much superior striking in this fight. So I'm going to go with Alateng, and I will take him to win this fight via decision. Impa Kasanganay versus Carlston Harris. So we got minus 115 on Impa and minus 105 on Carlston Harris. Then the interesting thing about this fight is the fact that Impa Kasanganay actually opened up around minus 185, and the public bet him all the way down to minus 115 now. And we pretty much have a pick'em fight here. A lot of people are in belief that Carlston Harris can go out there and get the job done here against Impa Kasanganay. Not me, though. I think that Impa will be okay here. I do think he has the better striking here, and I think that his grappling is up to snuff, that he should be able to fend off whatever Carlston Harris tries to throw out there at him. Now, Carlston, it seems like his game plan is more often than not to try to take his opponents down, grapple fuck them, find that ground and pound, or find that submission, but I do think that Impa is good enough in those situations that he should be able to nullify the amount of success that Carlston is going to have in this fight. Carlston, a lot of his earlier fights did end up going to a decision, but over his last 10 wins, he's been able to finish 7 of them, leading me to believe that he's finally being comfortable in terms of going out there and finding the kill rather than trying to play this fight safe. And Kasanganay, on the other hand, the majority of his fights have gone to a decision, although he went out there and grapple fucked Sasha Palatnikov, eventually finding that submission in the second round and getting that choke. So, it looks like he's trying to find another way to win his fights, especially after getting knocked out the way that he did against Joaquin Buckley 2 fights ago. I'm sure Impa is more than comfortable over there at Sanford MMA now. I'm sure they're ready to go and have a good game plan here to fight a guy like Carlston Harris, and I think a lot of it is going to be centered around Impa Kasanganay using very disciplined striking to try to stay at range, try to stay at distance, and, kind of evade those big bombs that Harris throws at times when he's not able to secure takedowns or have success in clinch positions. Carlston does have big power in his hands, so that's something that Impa is going to have to worry about. But as long as he can stay disciplined like he did against Maki Pitolo, get to a point where he feels comfortable that he could use his wrestling offensively and not get tied up in some sort of anaconda choke or any type of submission that Harris throws at him, he should be fine. I like Impa in this spot. I'm sure a lot of people that were waiting to bet on him are more than happy with this line now compared to what he was earlier. But, it wouldn't really surprise me if Harris ends up going off as the favorite, as I have seen nothing but love for Carlston, as, on my timeline and in other prediction videos. It seems a lot of people like what Carlston Harris brings to the table. I do too. 34 years old, in his prime, this is his time to go right now. But I think stylistically speaking, this is a very difficult fight for him to find a victory in, which is why ultimately I'm going to be going with the Impa Kasanganay side of things. So I'm going to go with Impa. I think we're going to see a classic vintage Impa performance where he goes out there, strikes, with a very disciplined approach, and then mixes in some clinch and some takedowns, just to try to keep Carlston thinking, keep him on the edge of his toes, and just keep him guessing in terms of what's coming next at him. So I'm going Impa Kasanganay, and I'm taking him to win the fight by decision. Erin Blanchfield versus Sarah Alpar. We got minus 320 on Blanchfield and plus 260 on Sarah Alpar. Let's start off on the Sarah Alpar side, who's had a whirlwind of things going on for her, especially since her loss to Jessica Rose Clark last year. She was on the receiving end of a $5,000 donation from Jake Paul, which a lot of people were putting a lot of stock into, especially after Sarah Alpar had to go out there and put a GoFundMe together since she was not able to make ends meet for herself and be a fighter. A lot of people know that's the story of the game for a lot of up-and-coming fighters, right? They have to hold down jobs, whether it's a waitress, whether it's personal training, whether it's just doing classes for free, whatever it may be. They need to stay active enough, financially, so that they can actually train and give the best of their abilities in their upcoming fights. Unfortunately for Sarah Alpar, although she has a decent wrestling background, I do think that she is limited in terms of her skills, especially with her striking, which I think is going to be exposed this weekend against a girl like Erin Blanchfield. My issue with Blanchfield also is, she's very heavily touted, minus 320 favorite coming into her UFC debut. A lot of people tooting her horn over the last couple of years, and finally she's going to be able to make her UFC debut here. But again, at 22 years old, you got to believe that she's still kind of green in the overall scheme of things. She has a good jiu-jitsu background. She has great wrestling as well herself, but her striking is something that's definitely improving on a fight-to-fight basis. We saw it on full display against Victoria Leonardo, where she was able to decapitate her in that second round with a beautiful head kick. And then after that, she showed her great striking in the Brogan Sanchez fight, mixing in some takedowns after that, as that is definitely her best path to victory. I think Blanchfield has a better jiu-jitsu game than Sarah Alpar, although Sarah Alpar, decent wrestler herself. I do think she leaves some openings in terms of being reversed and possibly even submitted in some of her fights. But I think Blanchfield will do a good job in terms of keeping this fight on the feet and letting her hands go, really damaging and hurting Sarah Alpar. And I think there could be a decent shot in terms of Erin Blanchfield actually finding a finish in this fight. I was looking at the odds and I was hoping that it was going to be at least a little bit better. It's plus 285 for Blanchfield inside the distance. I wish we would get a little bit wider of a line for that, but it's not too bad if you're truly in belief of what Erin Blanchfield brings to the table here. I do think she'll do a good enough job in terms of finding reversals on the ground if Alpar is successful at getting some takedowns, because I am not impressed with Alpar's ability to maintain top control and have that top pressure that's required to control a fight or at least find finishes. She was able to find a finish on her Contender Series fight against Shanna Young, but I do not think that Shanna Young is UFC caliber, although, a lot of what's going on with Erin Blanchfield now is more potential based than it is from what we've seen inside the cage. Don't get me wrong, it is impressive from what we've seen inside the cage, but at only 22 years old, you got to believe that she still has some flaws that she's trying to flesh out here. With that said, great first fight for her, much better than her original opponent a couple months ago when she was supposed to fight Norma Dumont up a weight class, but now she's back at 125 pounds where she should truly be, and I think that this is a great stylistic matchup for her. So even her to win by decision at minus 125, I think that's a decent spot. Her at minus 320, you could parlay her, but I would be careful. Again, a lot of this line is based on a hype, in my opinion. A lot of it is based on potential. And again, luckily enough for her, she's going up against an opponent where she should be able to show off that type of skill that a lot of people believe that she has. We just need to see it first, though. And it's difficult. It's a tough ask to go out there and bet on a girl at minus 320 who's only 22 years old, making her UFC debut against a fighter in Sarah Alpar who's fought some solid competition of her own. So be careful, be wary, but I do like what Erin Blanchfield brings to the table here. I do think we'll see her get better on a fight-to-fight basis, and this is no exception here against a girl like Sarah Alpar. So I am going Erin Blanchfield, and I'm going to take her to win this fight via decision. Montel Jackson versus JP Buys. We got minus 600 for Jackson and plus 450 on Bays, actually. JP Bays is how you pronounce it, apparently. But yeah, plus 450 is the underdog JP Bays. Let's start off with Bays, who's coming off a knockout loss to Bruno Silva in a very fun and competitive fight. We did see JP Bays have some success of his own. He did manage to survive against a high-level black belt with Bruno Silva on top of him for the majority of that first round. But then when it became a gunslinging contest in that second round, he did succumb to it as Bruno Silva was having a tremendous amount of success of finding that chin and finding that head and landing some big damage. It's a little concerning in terms of the way JP Bays is reacting to a lot of those shots, as I don't believe, a couple of those shots didn't seem to have the most sauce on them. So I'm kind of surprised that JP Bays was able to, or dropped from some of those shots that he dropped from. I think if Montel Jackson is landing those same shots on him and he's getting that kind of reaction out of Bays might drop and get knocked out a lot quicker than a lot of people expect him to. I'm expecting this fight to be a high-paced, back and forth fight, but I do think that we'll actually see Jackson have the more success here. I do think he's a slightly slicker boxer and kickboxer in this fight, and not to mention the 8-inch reach advantage and 5-inch height advantage he's going to have in this fight will play very well for him, or at least in his favor. I think the best way for Bays to win this fight is if he drags this fight to the ground and is able to have tremendous success from that top position, but I just don't see him having as much success as a guy like Brett Johns was able to, and as Ricky Simone was able to as well. That seems to be the best kryptonite for a guy like Montel Jackson, is just have heavy top pressure and be able to stay out of submissions that Montel Jackson is obviously going to be throwing up here. Montel Jackson was really pushed very, very hard as a minus 700 favorite against a guy like Felipe Corrales, but more so pushed in the fact that he was trying to find the finish, throwing everything and the kitchen sink at his opponent, but just was not able to get him out of there. Luckily enough for him, his cardio was able to hold up so that he was not able to get finished by a guy like Felipe Corrales, but I'm sure in his young career, that was definitely a very good thing for him to have to go through to deal, with whatever he's going to have to deal with in his upcoming fights. Quick fight against Jesse Strader, where he was another minus 600 favorite. I do expect him to have a little bit more issues here with JP Bays. However, I still do think he'll eventually find that finish. I'm a little bit stumped in terms of whether it's going to be a KO or a sub. I am going to lean with the KO, especially considering how poorly JP Bays was reacting to some of the punches that he was getting hit with by Bruno Silva. I think Montel Jackson has absolutely crazy hands, or at least power in his hands for a guy that's 135 pounds. And the story that's always brought up anytime Montel Jackson fights is this guy has the same gloves, or the same size of gloves that Francis Ngannou wears at the second lowest weight class, which is absolutely crazy. He has obviously some good power in his hands, some big hands, and then obviously a crazy grip as well when he's able to latch onto some of these dart strokes or some of the submissions that he's throwing out there against some of these fighters. Again, JB Bays a little bit too reckless for my liking at times. I do think he's going to find himself in trouble, and I do think that will be Montel Jackson that gets his hand raised here. I wish the totals was set at 2.5 and not at 1.5, because more than likely I would take the under 2.5 as a lock of the night play. I really like that spot, as I do think that both guys, like I said, leave openings for their opponents to find finishes, but I do think it's going to be Bays who actually ends up getting finished in this fight. The under 1.5 is roughly around plus 130. I don't mind it. I do think that we could see a finish pretty early in this fight, but I do like that Jackson minus 175 inside the distance, especially considering that he's a minus 600 on the money line. I do think that the path to victory for him is going to be via finisher. I'd be surprised if JP Bays goes a full 15 minutes without getting finished, especially by a guy like Montel Jackson, who has those finishing capabilities. Although, Montel Jackson was not able to get guys like Andre Sukumtad or Felipe Colares out, he did do his damnedest to do so, and I believe that JP Bays is a little bit more vulnerable and doesn't have as good durability as those guys that I previously mentioned. So I am going Montel Jackson by finish. I would say Jackson first round KO. Nicholas Motta versus Cameron VanCamp. We got minus 310 on Nicholas Motta and plus 245 on the short notice newcomer Cameron VanCamp. And now VanCamp steps in early, on short notice here for Jim Miller, who had to step out due to COVID-19, or at least testing positive for COVID-19. And this is a solid opportunity for VanCamp to come in and possibly spring off an upset here against Nicholas Motta. Now, I'll say this right off the bat. I think the line is a little bit too wide, right? Nicholas Motta shows that he has good hands, good counter striking, and good aggressiveness, but VanCamp shows that he has, that wild man ability about him, where he just kind of just bites down on his mouthpiece and goes buck wild. We have seen Nicholas Motta KO'd already in a couple of his fights, and that is not a good sign, especially against a guy who kind of just throws caution to the wind like Cameron VanCamp. But VanCamp, although he has a tattoo across his torso that says White Belt Gang, 8 out of his 15 victories have actually come via submission, and he looks pretty proficient, especially when he's on his back or when the fight is on the ground. He did get grinded out by Bobby Volker a couple fights ago over a 5-round period, where it did look like he didn't have too much to offer off of his back, but he did try to stay active, pull off some reversals, whatever it may be. But now here against Nicholas Motta has shown, been getting knocked out in the past. He has been submitted in the past, and we just haven't seen him recently have to deal with too heavy of a grapple-heavy approach. There isn't too much on his record that truly showcases to us that, he can deal with relentless grappling. The only other time that we've had to actually see that, I believe, was his stint on The Ultimate Fighter Brazil, where he took on Glyco Franca. His takedown defense looked decent in that first round. His get-up ability looked good in that first round, but it was that second round where it really started to wear on him, and we saw Franca get him to the ground and eventually find a submission victory. And I wouldn't be surprised if Cameron VanCamp is able to successfully do that as well. VanCamp will have a 3-inch height advantage here. I'm assuming a bit of a reach advantage too. But the interesting thing about VanCamp is the majority of his fights have been taking place at 170 pounds, but he's taken this fight on 155 pounds. Last time he made 155 pounds was 3.5 years ago. So I'm kind of interested to see what it actually looks like on the scale once it gets to that point. Maybe he's going to, have to really cut to make this weight class, and it probably won't translate well into the fight. Like I said at the top of the breakdown, I do think the odds are a little bit too wide. I do think there will be some issues in terms of, Nicholas Motta covering that minus 310. But I think the sneakiest way to attack this fight is actually the under 2.5. When I initially saw it, it was around minus 115. Let me see if there's been any changes to that since I last saw it. Yeah, it's still roughly around minus 115. Fight doesn't go to decision, minus 145. I think this fight is going to have violence on it. It's either going to be a Motta KO or a VanCamp submission. I do lean with the former. I do think that Motta will find that chin of VanCamp, as VanCamp, like I said, swings like a wild man, doesn't really have the greatest amount of discipline when it comes to his striking, which will cause him some trouble here against a heavy hitter like Motta, who's very, high tight guard, waits for his opponent, waits for the opportunity to, take advantage of counters. I like what I see from Motta in terms of his striking. It's just his overall game. His ground game just doesn't look the greatest, and that's where I think he could get into trouble here with VanCamp. So if you want to talk value, I think it's on the VanCamp side here, considering how wide the odds are. But there are a couple X factors that we need to take into consideration, right? The short notice nature of the fight, and the fact that this is his first fight down at 155 pounds in 3.5 years, and he's taking it on short notice, so who knows how much weight he's going to have to cut. If you're looking to bet this fight, I would wait until after the wins to see what kind of shape VanCamp comes in. Regardless, under 2.5 at minus 115, I think is a gift here, as I do think that there's going to be a ton of violence in this fight. But I will go with Motta, and I'm going to take Motta to win this fight by KO, and that line currently sits at plus 130. Again, I'd rather take the under 2.5 to cover a possible VanCamp victory as well. And even either way, I think that this finish, whatever happens, will probably come before the ending of the second round. So I will go with Nicholas Motta, and I'm going to take him by first round KO. Rong taking on Brandon Jenkins. Jenkins actually stepping in on short notice here after Dakota Bush had to pull out due to COVID-19, or at least a positive COVID-19 test. Luckily for the UFC, they're able to quickly find a replacement for him, a guy in Brandon Jenkins who actually fought not too long ago, a couple weeks ago actually, for the PFL, where he was able to land a beautiful flying knee finish over Jacob Kilburn, former UFC fighter Jacob Kilburn, and that actually allows him to go on a 3-fight winning streak and gets him signed to the UFC, albeit on short notice here. He's a 29-year-old with a 15-7 record, and he, I believe his nickname is the highlight reel or something like that, and he does fight, pretty in a very entertaining fashion, I should say. Spinning stuff, flying stuff, as we obviously saw in the Jacob Kilburn fight, and, other than that, he seems a little bit more like a pot shotter than anything. There are a couple combinations that he threw against Jacob Kilburn Kilburn, but when I was watching our older fights of him, he seemed to be one of those guys that if he's the one with the foot on the gas and he's the one pushing the pressure and moving forward, he kind of just throws out one shot here and there, uses his kicks to kind of corral his opponent into the direction that he wants to go, and then start throwing his hands after that. Zhu Rong on the other side, I think he could have the crisper striking in this fight. He's 17-4, 21 years old, still looking to, really round out his game inside the UFC. But I think that the odds on this are just a little bit too crazy. Minus 350 for Zhu Rong and plus 260 for Brandon Jenkins. I think that line is absolutely insane. If you're putting a gun to my head and saying which side are you going to bet here, and get the best value out of, you got to say that it's got to be the Brandon Jenkins side. Although he's coming in on short notice in this fight, he does still possess some solid skills that could cause Zhu Rong some issues here. But I do expect this fight to remain on the feet. If anything, I wouldn't be surprised to see Zhu Rong actually, try to flip the script and try to take Jenkins down and try to grapple fuck him, as that has definitely been the kryptonite to Jenkins in the past, especially if people don't want to deal with his unorthodox style of striking at times. But even if this fight does stay on the feet, I think that Zhu Rong is a crisper, straighter striker here compared to a little bit more of that wild and reckless type of style that Brandon Jenkins throws with, and that could cause Jenkins some issues here dealing with that more technical striker in the Zhu Rong side of things. Again, the line is a little bit too crazy. It makes no sense. I would not at all advise parlaying Zhu Rong at minus 350. I think the sneakiest spot on this fight is actually the under 2.5, which currently sits around minus 125. Now, it's still new, right? It's still fresh in terms of when this matchup was announced. So I'm not 100% sure in terms of what the widely available odds here, at least what the widely available total is going to be. So if it is 2.5, I would recommend hitting that under 2.5, as I could see some violence here. And you could also, say on the Brandon Jenkins side of things, who's taking this fight on 3 days notice, his cardio is probably not up to snuff here. He probably believes that this is a spot where he needs to go out there and get a quick knockout. Otherwise, his gas tank is going to fail him, and he's going to be on the other end of a possible knockout the later that this fight goes. So I'm expecting chaos here. Outside of Zhu Rong going out there and going with the grapple heavy approach, I'd be surprised if that's what happens. I think we'll see him stay at distance and try to get those strikes off. Both guys, Brandon Jenkins is going to be the slightly taller guy here and with a 1 inch reach advantage as well. So I don't know if Zhu Rong is going to be completely staying at distance, but I'm sure he can find his way into the pocket and land some good strikes here and land some good combinations against a guy like Brandon Jenkins. So I am going with the Zhu Rong side of things here. I'm going to pick him to actually win this fight by second round TKO, but the issue in my opinion is that the odds are just way too high. Don't play Zhu Rong minus 350. Don't parlay him, nothing like that. Take the under 2.5, if anything. It could hit, it couldn't hit, but at least you're getting better odds than minus 350 on a 21-year-old kid who's still trying to carve himself out and get comfortable against legitimate competition in MMA. He came up short as a minus 210 favorite against Rodrigo Vargas in his UFC debut. Now he's coming in as a minus 350 against a short notice guy. Don't get me wrong, in Brandon Jenkins, but it's not like Brandon Jenkins is this can off the side of the road, right? He's 15-7. He has 22 fights. He has one more fight than what Zhu Rong brings to the table. So the guy's definitely been around, and he's fought, a ton of different opponents. He's even headlined an LFA card in the past. So this isn't just a nobody, just the UFC picked up here. So Zhu Rong definitely needs to mind his P's and Q's. I am going to take him to win this fight by knockout, but that minus 350 line is just a little bit too crazy. So final prediction here, I am going Zhu Rong, and I'm taking him by second round knockout. Raquel Pennington versus Patty Kianzad. We got minus 130 on Pennington and plus 110 on Patty Kianzad. Let's start off on the Pennington side of things, who's 2-3 in her last 5 fights, but still shows solid competitive aspects of her game, which I think will allow her to get past Patty Kianzad this weekend. She's a fighter that's pretty much, not the greatest at one thing, but pretty good at everything that allows her to kind of tie her full MMA game together and give a lot of her opponents some issues. The Marion Renault fight, there was a lot of clinching in that fight where she was getting the better of it, pushing her up against the cage and landing some dirty boxing and dirty, just clinch work. She was doing a lot of good work there. The Holly Holm fight, she just could not deal with the power and the strength of Holly Holm in those situations. Holly was grappling for her life, and Raquel Pennington could really not do much about it. But I'm sure she learned a lot in that fight, especially in terms of having to up her strength and her physicality so that she can beat some of these women when they do try to overpower her in those sense. The Irene Aldana fight, that was another one where we saw her put on a solid pace and pressure in those first couple rounds, and then after that decided to go to her grappling and her clinch work, which really gave Irene Aldana some issues. I feel as though that Aldana, that fight is a lot more difficult of a fight than Penny Kianzad for Raquel Pennington, and I feel as though she should go out there and implement a similar type of game plan, maybe a little bit more focused around takedowns and clinching and trying to overpower Penny Kianzad compared to, just try to outstrike her from distance. Now, even if she does go out there and try to outstrike her from distance, she has enough of a pace and enough of a hard-nosed type of style that it could cause Penny Kianzad some issues. Penny, she does her best work when she's disciplined and able to land those significant strikes from distance and really pop her opponent's heads back, just like she did in the Alexis Davis fight. However, that was a close fight in the Alexis Davis fight, right? I believe MMA Decisions pretty much had that all for Alexis Davis, as she was really pushing the pressure against Penny and landing some good shots and putting some good volume on her as well. It just looked like the more effective shots were coming from Penny. However, I think that Raquel Pennington is a much better striker than what Alexis Davis brings to the table. And if she was having that much success against Penny Kianzad, I fully believe that Raquel Pennington should be able to replicate that and then some to truly sway the judges in her favor. So I actually like Raquel Pennington here. Minus 130, I think, is a really good spot. I'm not a big believer in Penny Kianzad, and I don't think that she's gonna, her super disciplined style is really gonna work out for her here. As Raquel Pennington has endless cardio, she should be able to come forward, throughout this entire fight, really put it on Penny Kianzad, and then mix in the clinching and grappling, and she should be able to grind this fight out. So I'm actually gonna be going with Raquel Pennington here. Like I said, a full overall MMA game, and I think it's really gonna cause Penny Kianzad some issues. Kianzad is on a little bit of a run now, 4-fight winning streak at this point in time, and it's a lot centered around her striking, but I do think she will struggle here with the much more complete Raquel Pennington. Out of the last 4 fighters, I'd say Pennington is the most complete fighter that Kianzad has had to go up with at this point in time. So I am going Pennington, and I'm going to take it to win this fight via decision. Mike Rodriguez versus Tafon Nchukwi. We got minus 125 for Nchukwi and plus 105 for slow Mike Rodriguez. Now, both guys are coming off of underwhelming performances last time around. Mike Rodriguez most notably losing to Danilo Marquez after he could not stop any takedowns, nor could he pull the trigger. That's probably the lowest point in my betting career, is actually backing Mike Rodriguez in that spot as such a heavy favorite, but I expected him to go out there, pull the trigger, find that chin of Danilo Marquez and put him out, just like Kennedy and Nchukwi was able to do so in Marquez's following fight. But Rodriguez, goes out there and shits the bed once again as a big favorite, although he did have claim to beat Ed Herman at least twice in that fight as a minus 275 favorite, but ends up coming short as the veteran Ed Herman finesses his way to a Kimura victory late in that 3rd round. Mike Rodriguez, decent striking, good Muay Thai, good power, obviously some good work in the clinch, but I think he's going to have his work cut out for him here against Tafon Nchukwi, who is just a little bit meaner and a little bit more crisp with his strikes. Nchukwi coming off a very underwhelming performance, like I said, against Junior Park last time around, where he was a minus 155 favorite. But, I think what cost him in that fight was the fact that he was down at middleweight. It was his second fight down at 185 pounds, and I feel like he just couldn't keep up with the speed and the tempo and the pace of or he wouldn't be able to keep up with the speed, tempo, and pace of a lot of the 185ers, and Junior Park was kind of the base floor of guys that he'll be going up against, and he just could not pass that victory or could not pass that fight. Here, though, luckily for him, he's going back up to light heavyweight, where I feel like is his best chance to actually make a run and be able to actually have success in this fight, especially against a guy like Mike Rodriguez, who's going to be willing to go out there and throw with him. If they do engage in the clinch, I do expect Tafon to be the slightly stronger guy. And also, I love the fact that he's a little bit more active in the clinch positions than what Mike Rodriguez throws out there. I wouldn't be surprised to see Tafon Nchukwi try to land some takedowns here, as Mike Rodriguez just does not look good off of his back. And I think a guy like Tafon could absolutely take advantage of that. But even if this stays in the striking realm, I feel like the consistency of the way that Tefon throws, whether it's a one-shot leg kick or whatever the hell it is, just to stay out there, stay active, and stay competitive, I think he's going to do a really good job in terms of doing that here against Mike Rodriguez. Rodriguez, at times it's more so like he banks on his power than anything. The last time he did get his hand raised was against Marcin Prachnio, where he was able to crack him in that clinch position with some beautiful elbows and put him out. Since then, that's been his only victory in his last 5 fights. Even the no contest against John Allen, that was overturned after John Allen was able to beat him over a 15-minute mark, but then a couple months later was tested positive by USADA, and that fight got overturned to a no contest. Just too many flaws in Mike Rodriguez's game at this point in time. I thought it was enough, I still thought he had enough strengths in his game to go out there and beat a guy who, I just don't think is any good in Danilo Marquez, but he still ended up coming up short in that fight too. If this remains a striking contest, I do expect Tefon to be the better fighter. I believe in his durability more. I believe in his crisper striking. I believe in his patience compared to what Mike Rodriguez is going to be throwing out there. And not to mention, I think Tefon might have a slight speed advantage. Not the biggest, but still a little bit of a speed advantage that should allow him to have more success in the striking realm, getting his combinations off and getting out of the way of the big shots of Mike Rodriguez. Rodriguez will obviously have a 4-inch height advantage in this fight as well as a 5-inch reach advantage. But I do think that Tefon won't have much trouble in terms of closing the distance and getting his shots off. I do think that we'll actually see Tefon land a knockout as well. I don't think that Rodriguez has the greatest durability, and I do think he is going to be there to be hit, especially against a guy like Tefon who's just going to be dead set on finding that chin of Mike Rodriguez. So I am leaning with Tefon. This is possibly a buy low spot for him. I remember everybody tooting his horn and saying he's the next big thing, especially after his performance on the Contender Series. And it seems like everybody's jumping ship now after he ended up losing to Junyoon Park. I think that's more so people not giving Park the respect that he deserves than Tefon not looking as good as he did or as he should have against Park that night. But I do think that we'll see Nchukwi, right that wrong, get back into the winners column, and I think that this could be the end of the career, or at least UFC career, of Mike Rodriguez. So I'm going to take Tefon. I'm actually going to take him to win this fight by knockout as well. I do think he'll find that chin. Plus 200 is a great line as well, in my opinion, especially in a fight where I expect it to be played out in scenarios where KOs are going to be possible. Unless, of course, we see a completely revamped Tefon Nchukwi takes the smart game plan approach, which is let's ground Mike Rodriguez and try to work him from that top position. Very tough to say that's going to happen, especially, if we've never really seen that from Tefon in the past. But I do think he goes out there and wins this fight, whether it's striking or whether it's him going to take a grapple heavy approach. So I am going Tefon Nchukwi, and I'm going to take him to win this fight via first round knockout. Joaquin Buckley versus Antonio Arroyo. We got minus 210 on Buckley and plus 175, I should say, actually, on Antonio Arroyo. Now, Buckley obviously coming off that devastating loss to Alessio Di Chirico, and I think it's good for him to finally have that monkey off of his back so that he can go out there and perform without any pressure on his shoulders. A lot of people were putting a ton of pressure on his shoulders, I believe, after that Impa Kasanganay knockout of the century, and he's kind of been forced to go out there and try to find highlight reel finishes to appease the bosses and appease the fans. But he did get a decent victory over Jordan Wright a couple months after that Kasanganay finish, and then in the Di Chirico fight, another one where I think he was just seeking the knockout a little bit too much, and it just cost him, and Di Chirico was able to blast him with a head kick, which eventually knocked him out there. Now, 8 months off, I'm sure he's been able to reset, refocus himself, and go out there and try to get some more victories, and I think that this is a great opportunity for him and a great opponent to do it against with Antonio Arroyo. There are some inklings that Buckley will be working on his grappling here, looking to take Antonio Arroyo to the ground and really exemplify the flaw that Antonio Arroyo has with his grappling, especially that we saw last time around where Deron Winn, a much shorter and smaller opponent than Arroyo, easily taking Arroyo down, albeit Winn does have a great wrestling background, so I'm sure it was a lot easier for him, but the amount of resistance that was there was just so flawed and so low, in my opinion, from Arroyo that I think that a lot of people expect Buckley to have just as much success if he goes out there and looks to go that route. But even if he doesn't, if he goes out there and just does the Buckley thing, I think eventually he'll find that knockout. Arroyo's strength is actually striking, but I do think that he shows some flaws, and he doesn't really do the best job in terms of maintaining his reach and his size advantage that he'll definitely have here. He's going to have, I believe, a 5 or 6 inch height advantage in this fight. He will actually be at a reach disadvantage, but obviously with kicks and the teep and all that, he can do a really good job in terms of maintaining his distance. However, I think with the amount of power and the bullish type of approach that Joaquin Buckley approaches his fights with, that will allow him to close that distance and eventually find that chin of Arroyo. Arroyo has shown some decent durability, but I don't think he's been punched by a guy like Joaquin Buckley over his last several fights, which I think will eventually find himself in some trouble here. I think Arroyo slows down at a pretty sloppy rate, whereas Buckley still goes out there and showcases just as much knockout power in the first round as he does in the third round, as he just doesn't lay off his opponents at all, right? He always moves forward. He's always throwing big bombs. It's almost difficult for his opponents to kind of counter him from distance because they're scared of what's coming back at them to begin with. Kevin Holland did a really good job in Joaquin Buckley's debut as he continued to stay on his bicycle and just waited for the opportune moment to snipe him from the outside and then eventually finish him in the third round. I just don't think that Arroyo has that in him. I think he's going to struggle a lot here. I think we'll see Buckley continuously push him back, whether it's with takedowns or whether his power punches. I think eventually Arroyo is going to break, and I think we'll see Buckley notch that knockout. I'm actually going to be banking a little bit on that round 3 prop here. I think that Buckley can just slowly make his mark throughout this fight, and then once that third round approaches, I think we'll see Arroyo significantly slow down, and we'll see Buckley really start to get more success, land closer and closer to that chin, eventually finding that chin halfway through that third round. So I am going with Buckley here. I think he, finds his confidence once again. I think he bounces back from that devastating knockout to D. Carrico back in January, and he gets a knockout of his own here. So I am going Joaquin Buckley via third round KO. Tony Gravely versus Nate Maness. We got minus 200 on Gravely and plus 170 on Nate Maness. Let's start off on the Maness side of things, who's 2-0 in the UFC now. One of them coming via decision over Johnny Munoz Jr. A very close fight. Could have gone either way. There was a point taken away on Munoz due to a low blow, I believe, in the third round. There's too many occurrences of those, especially in that first round, that the referee was just forced to kind of, take a point in that fight. But Maness did a good job in terms of nullifying the amount of damage and work that Munoz was getting done from on top. Although I do believe that Maness was actually saved by the bell in the first round, as Munoz had a ton of success after he got him down and was pretty much cutting through his guard and didn't have too much issues. And near the ending of that first round, he got into a very dominant position where he was just raining down shots. And if he had another maybe 10 or 15 seconds, he probably could have finished that fight. After that, he did struggle a little bit more to get Maness down. He did have to push him up against a cage a bunch to, kind of stall Maness so that he could potentially look for a takedown, but it didn't really come as easy as it did in that first round. Now, I don't really rate Munoz's wrestling the greatest, although he has great BJJ. His wrestling game is still trying to catch up to his BJJ game, and luckily for us, we have Tony Gravely here, who's a much better wrestler and should be able to complete these takedowns, and he does have some good crushing top pressure that should allow him to work to get to a good position, a dominant position, and then eventually work to get some ground and pound going. Maness, good striker, has done very well for himself. Obviously won the TKO title over Jesse Arnett before making it to the UFC. And, that was a fight where I felt like if Jesse Arnett used his wrestling, he probably would have tremendous success against Maness. However, he decided to go out there and strike with Maness, and he ended up getting knocked out in that fight. I believe that was in the third round or so. The Taylor Lapilus fight for Nate Maness, he just couldn't get going. It seemed like Lapilus had him strung up, had him, just pretty much waiting on every little inch and every little move that Lapilus did, because he reacted to everything that Lapilus was throwing, and then eventually Lapilus landed a beautiful side kick to the body that dropped Maness, and then he finished him after that. But he did rebound with that win over Kelly VanCamp. I don't understand the significance behind that fight, but he goes out there and knocks out a 3-2 guy, makes it to the UFC in short notice, beats Johnny Munoz, and then even in the Luke Sanders fight, has tremendous success in terms of drawing Sanders into a bit of a firefight and then finishing him with a club and sub situation. So good win for Maness in that spot. But it was interesting to see that Luke Sanders was actually a minus 150 favorite in that fight, as I believe a lot of people thought that if Sanders could get his grappling going and his wrestling going, he would have had tremendous success. Luckily, we got Tony Gravely now, who should go out there and implement some sort of a grappling heavy approach. And I think that would be the best in terms of being able to nullify what Nate Maness is able to do on the feet. The only thing that kind of gives me pause here, it does seem like Gravely does slow down a little bit later in fights, and it is, not to the extent of, the potential of him getting finished, at a crazy high clip by Nate Maness, but still to a worrisome amount, especially if he's not able to get Maness down and he has to go out there and strike with him for 5 minutes. I think he's going to be in some trouble. With that said, though, I do think that we'll see Gravely actually ground this fight early here and find a finish quickly thereafter. I think in the first or second round, he should be able to ground Maness, get through that guard, start passing, get to dominant positions, and start raining down blows. Maness has a decent submission game, but it's definitely not as good off of his back as when he's in club and sub situations or when he's on top of his opponents. And I'd be very surprised if he actually found himself on top of Tony Gravely in this situation unless he gets a knockdown here. I think a very sneaky spot in this fight is actually the under 2.5 around plus 165, as I do think that both guys have finishing potential, but I do think it'll be Gravely that actually ends up getting his hand raised here. So I do like Gravely here. I do like him inside the distance. I'm actually going to be taking Gravely via second round ground and pound TKO. Arman Tsarukyan versus Christos Giagos. We got minus 750 for Arman Tsarukyan and plus 525 for Christos Giagos. Very simple fight to break down, right? What are Christos Giagos' strengths whenever he fights? It's his wrestling, right? Usually that allows him to get bailed out of bad situations, gets the takedown, and is able to grind out his opponents. But his gas tank is just so skeptical and so sketchy. And we've seen a lot of fighters have a ton of success against him later in fights because he just slows down so goddamn much. He did find himself in a ton of trouble early against Sean Soriano last time around as Soriano stepped in on short notice to take on Giagos. Luckily for Giagos, his durability held up and he was able to find that submission in the second round, locking up a beautiful Darce choke against Sean Soriano. Before that, it went up against Carlton Maness, who again, not a big threat in the striking realm, even though that's his strength, but it just doesn't throw enough power to truly give anybody issues. And I think that Giagos didn't really respect him enough and was able to land takedowns whenever he needed to get a victory in that fight. Here with Arman Tsarukyan, though, I think Giagos has his work absolutely cut out for him. I love Arman Tsarukyan in pretty much every aspect of this fight. He's 24 years old, only getting better on a fight-to-fight basis. His only 2 losses, his first one coming, I believe, in his second or third fight, which he quickly redeemed himself with exactly or just about 2 days shy of a year later, where he was able to go out there and finish that guy. I believe the guy finished him in 30 seconds with the knockout. He goes back and finishes him a year later, to a minute and a half in that first round with the guillotine. Then his only other loss, Islam Makhachev, UFC debut, short notice spot. Made a good account of himself there, right? Short notice, but still went takedown for takedown, scramble for scramble against a high-level fighter like Islam Makhachev. And now we're seeing that Tsarukyan is really starting to round out his training. Initially training full-time over there at Tiger Muay Thai. Now he's been training full-time at American Top Team. I believe that Tiger Muay Thai is slowly just starting to fall apart, so a lot of fighters are leaving over there. But luckily for Tsarukyan, he has a great team with American Top Team to fall back on to continue to progress towards the amount of potential that a lot of people believe that he has. I truly think that he's going to end up fighting Islam Makhachev once again, maybe even for gold at a certain point in these next couple of years, especially if he continues to progress at the rate that he's progressing at. His grappling is obviously his bread and butter, but his striking is getting so much better every single time that we see him. His combinations flow effortlessly. He was just absolutely piecing up a lot of his opponents. And even though he hasn't found a finish inside the UFC to this point, I believe that he'll find that first finish come this weekend against Christos Giagos. Christos Giagos' gas tank is just a little bit too much of a worrisome spot for me, and I think that the pace, pressure, and relentlessness that Tsarukyan is going to put on him early in this fight will drain that gas tank even quicker, and I think that we'll get a Tsarukyan finish in either round 2 or round 3. I think Tsarukyan is the shit. I think he is a top 5 talent, and I think it's only a matter of time before he gets there. And, maybe getting some victories and some finishes will probably expedite his victory or his goal to get to that top 5 in an eventual title shot. I like this matchup a lot for him. I like the inside the distance around that plus 140, plus 160 mark for him. I think he gets the finish here at a pretty good clip. And, a lot of people are going to be like, why couldn't he finish Matt Frevola? What makes you think that he's going to finish a guy like Christos Giagos? It's the Giagos gas tank, in my opinion. That's just a little bit too much of a worrisome. If you're looking to back Giagos at all here, Tsarukyan will put a pace and pressure on him that Giagos will not be able to keep up with, and then I think that will either open up a submission or a TKO opportunity for Tsarukyan here. So I'm going to go with Tsarukyan second round KO, and I'll definitely be poking those round 2 and round 3 props if they're juicy enough, which I think they will be, considering the extreme level of skill difference here. I think it's just absolutely insane how much better Tsarukyan is better than Giagos. I don't think that this is going to be an instance like last week or 2 weeks ago where we had Muradov against Mearshart. I started off that breakdown by saying, let's not talk too much about who's going to win this fight, but how Muradov is going to win this fight. And that obviously came back to bite me in the butt for saying something like that. But I feel much more comfortable saying that this weekend with Tsarukyan, as Tsarukyan is a much more proven and better fighter than Muradov, in my opinion. And then the clear flaw from Giagos, which is, his strength is his wrestling, which there's no way he's out wrestling Tsarukyan. And then his gas tank, which is obviously going to show its head probably in the second round. That's where Tsarukyan will start to take over and find that finish. So I'm going a Tsarukyan second round TKO. Ariane Lipski versus Mandy Bohm. We got minus 115 on Lipski and minus 105 on Bohm, so we can pretty much call this fight a pick'em. Mandy Bohm making her UFC debut now, as she's put together 7 straight victories. She did actually lose her first ever fight, and it got changed to a no contest. I'm not entirely sure why, but I've been trying to scour the web, trying to find any articles that I could to figure out why. But she did get tapped out in that. Actually, she got put to sleep in that fight via a triangle choke, I believe it was. She went out, didn't tap or anything like that, and for some reason they ended up changing it to a no contest after that. But in ring, it was announced that she had lost that fight via triangle choke. Since then, she's been able to put together 7 straight victories, like I said. I watched. It's weird because we have tape on her first 2 fights, and then we have tape on her last 2 fights, so we can't really see, the middle amount, the middle 5, or what is that? Middle 3 fights, I guess we can say. To see, the levels of improvements from a fight-to-fight basis. But you can definitely see the improvement from her second fight to her 6th fight, because it definitely showed some improvements, at least in terms of the comfortability with her striking. It looked like she didn't really know what she was doing in those first two fights in the striking realm, even with the takedowns, right? Like, she was doing some weird takedowns, but she's definitely gotten better. She's gotten a better idea of how to be more effective in the clinch, how to be more effective on the ground in terms of controlling their opponent, and eventually, finding a submission like she did again in that Mason Wong fight. And then in her last fight against Ikut, I might be butchering her name there, but she did really good work in the clinch, landing some good knees, landing some good damage, defending the takedowns quite well, and then just letting her Muay Thai go to try to secure a victory, and she was able to get a decision victory that night. Ariane Lipski, on the other hand, is fallen on pretty hard times, especially since coming to the UFC. Her only 2 wins are against Isabella de Padua, who took her that fight on less than 24 hours notice, and then Luana Carolina, where she was able to get that weird knee bar, but I don't really rate Carolina that highly anyway, so I kind of throw that win out the window. But anytime she's faced anybody with any type of substance, Joanne Calderwood, Molly McCann, Antonia Shevchenko, and even lastly against Montana De La Rosa, she ends up falling short. It's always her takedown defense that seems to be the bane of her UFC career, and I feel like she needs to really shore that up before we can go out there and bet her confidently, especially in a spot like this where it seems like Mandy Bohm could potentially go for takedowns and try to grind a Lipski out there, or even find a finish on the ground. Mandy Bohm does have Daniel Weichel in her corner, obviously training with her on a day-to-day basis over there in Germany. Most people, if you guys have been following Bellator, Weichel's been around Bellator for a very long time, so I'm sure he's been able to instill some very solid skills for Mandy Bohm in that amount of time. Lipski, on the other hand, before her Montana De La Rosa fight, she actually changed training camps and went over to American Top Team, and it didn't seem like they were able to help her takedown defense, but I will cut her some slack there, as Montana De La Rosa has a pretty decent wrestling background, so I'm sure it was a little bit easier for her to land those takedowns than most people were expecting. Lipski, though, she's going to have to show solid takedown defense in this fight, because on the feet, I think she could absolutely blow Mandy Bohm out the water. She has good pop on her shots, she has good sting on her shots, a very good Muay Thai base, obviously, and she has a ton of success when she's able to get into that clinch position, land elbows and knees, and really cut up her opponents and damage them. That's what made her the violence queen in KSW. That's why she was such a big fan favorite before coming to the UFC. But now, it's kind of like, she never brings out the violence with her whenever she comes out of the locker room. I do think that this is a winnable fight for her, though. I think that Mandy Bohm still has some growing to do. I don't know how effective she truly will be with the takedowns if that's the route that she goes. But I do feel as though we should see some improvements from Lipski here. I'm not going balls to the wall here with Lipski, though. I do have a ton of question marks. I think both women have finishing capabilities as well, which I think will kind of aid one of my best bets for this fight, which is actually the under 2.5, which is at plus 185. I think that if Bohm gets this fight to the ground, she could potentially find a finish. But if this fight stays on the feet, I think we'll see Lipski, just carry out that aggression, carry out the frustration that she's had over the last several years, especially with not being able to show her true self. I think she's going to go out there, and I think she could actually get a finish here over Mandy Bohm. Again, plus 185, there's a reason I feel comfortable with that, because I think that's a decent line for us to take advantage of an under here, especially between two women that, fight a little bit recklessly at times and either leave themselves to be finished or are aggressive enough to find their own finish as well. I am going to just reluctantly lean with the Lipski side of things, considering her level of competition. Hopefully seeing some potential improvements out of her since training over at ATT now for 2 full camps. And then obviously, just being the much more weathered veteran at this point in time, whereas Mandy Bohm is still on the way up, even though she's 5 years older than Ariane Lipski. So I will lean Lipski here. I'm going to go with Lipski, probably second round TKO. Yeah, not a big read on this fight. Lipski, again, it's just that takedown defense that's just so difficult to get behind. If she can't stop takedowns, she'll be back in KSW in no time. Let's just put it that way. But I will give her the benefit of the doubt in this fight. I'm going to take her to win this fight via TKO in the second round over Mandy Bohm. And hopefully that's the start of a little bit of a run that she's going to be able to put together and achieve some of that potential that a lot of people expected her to have coming into the UFC. So once again, I will go with Ariane Lipski, second round TKO. Devin Clark versus E1 Cutelaba. We got minus 140 on Cutelaba and plus 120 on Brown Bear, I think his nickname is, Devin Clark. Let's start off with the Devin Clark side of things, who's coming off a submission loss to Anthony Smith in his first ever main event slot for the UFC. And if I'm not mistaken, that was on short notice, where Clark and Smith were forced to step in for that main event slot after Derek Lewis and Curtis Blades got called off last minute. That did snap a 2-fight winning streak where Devin Clark was able to get a decision victory over both Daquan Townsend and Alonzo Menafield, his first ever professional MMA loss. In that fight in particular, obviously Devin Clark wanted to go out there and try to spam takedowns and get them. I don't believe he completed any takedowns there, but he did do enough work in terms of staying active enough and throwing enough volume out there that it did cause Alonzo Menafield some trouble. He pushed him up against the cage and got, there were some moments where Alonzo Menafield was the one pushing Devin Clark up against the cage, but Menafield was not throwing any volume. Devin Clark was the one that was remaining busy, dishing out the damage, and ultimately got the judge's decision because of that. It's comforting to know that a guy like Devin Clark can do that, right? Like a lot of his success is revolving around him landing takedowns, but if he didn't, just as he did in the Alonzo Menafield fight, he can still go out there and be successful by kind of implementing his will in that aspect. Luckily for him, though, unluckily for him, with E1 Cutelaba, you got another guy with a decent wrestling background, Greco-Roman wrestling, if I'm not mistaken, with E1 Cutelaba, and I think that will allow him to kind of nullify the grapple heavy approach that Devin Clark is going to throw here and then go out there and try to get a knockout victory of his own. I do like what Iwan Cutelaba brings to the table here in terms of defensively being able to nullify the amount of success that Devin Clark will have so that he can let his hands go after that. Cutelaba, obviously very sketchy. Last 5 fights for him, he's won 3-1, where his last fight was a draw to Dustin Jacoby, where he had a very strong first round and then tapered off in the second and third rounds. I believe one of the judges gave him a 10-8, one judge gave him a 29-28, and then one judge gave Jacoby a 29-28. So a very weird fight all around, but no L on Iwan Cutelaba's record after that. Obviously, that was following 2 straight fights against Magomed Ankalaev, the first of which was stopped controversially by Kevin McDonald, I believe the referee was, who got duked by Iwan Cutelaba's rope-a-dope, and then he ended up stopping the fight there. But then we pretty much knew the writing was on the wall for Cutelaba in that second fight, as Ankalaev dispatched of him in that first round. Before that, he was able to secure that victory over Khalil Roundtree That was hot off Khalil Roundtree having that Ty Leal performance against Eric Anders, and a lot of people thought he was changing his ways and was going to be a much more successful fighter. But Iwan Cutelaba is like, cool story, bro. And he goes for the takedown, lands the takedown, and starts to pound out Khalil Roundtree, and then eventually finishing him up against the cage afterwards. Khalil did manage to get back to his feet a couple of times, but Cutelaba did not relent. He stayed on top of him and just continued to push the pressure, and then eventually finished him later in that first round. Interesting to see how the grappling sequences will work out here. I do believe that Devin Clark is the better grappler, but I do think he's going to have a lot of issues in terms of actually establishing that top pressure and establishing that success from the grappling that he should have here. I do believe Cutelaba will stuff a couple takedowns. I do think he'll be able to remain on his feet for the majority of this fight. And I don't think the majority of this fight is going to be that long, to be honest. I think that we'll see Cutelaba land that knockout blow against Devin Clark, push him up against the cage, and then break him. I think it's going to take Cutelaba something defensively. Like, it's going to have to look a little bit about like that Gadzhimurad Antigulov fight. Now, I don't believe Devin Clark has as bad of a gas tank as Antigulov does, but I do think it'll look similar in the fact that we'll see Devin Clark have some early success here. But then after that, I think he's going to deal with a lot of issues in terms of going out there and, again, grounding Iwan Cutelaba or even having clinch success against him. My only concern is, like, I have seen Cutelaba kind of slow down later in fights. Again, not to the Antigulov level, but I have seen him slow down, and it has been detrimental for him in the past. And I think a guy like Devin Clark could definitely take advantage of that, especially if you take into consideration the performance that he had against Alonzo Menafield. I still do end up on the side of Cutelaba here. I do think he will stuff the takedowns of Devin Clark, and I think he'll let his hands go after that. And then I think at a certain point, he's going to find a big punch against Devin Clark that will ground Devin, and then he'll follow up with some ground and pound. So I do like Cutelaba here. By KO, I believe that line is currently sitting at plus 115. Minus 140 is not too bad of a line for Cutelaba. Again, a little bit sketched out in terms of the possible success that Clark could have here and if it could zap the power of Cutelaba the later that this fight goes. But I will still take Cutelaba. Luckily for him, like I said, has a bit of a wrestling background of his own that should aid him in canceling out the amount of success that Devin Clark will have, and then he should find that big power knockout afterwards. So I'm going to go Cutelaba. Cutelaba knockout plus 115 is probably the best spot. I'll say first round knockout as well. So I'm going first round knockout for Iwan Cutelaba. Time for the main event. We got a light heavyweight scrap between Anthony Smith and Ryan Spann. We got minus 160 on Anthony Smith and plus 140 is return on Ryan Spann, who's making his first ever main event for the UFC, whereas Anthony Smith has definitely gotten a ton of main events under his belt to this point since he's found a resurgence in his career since moving up to the 205-pound division. Now, I believe his last fight at middleweight was against Thiago Santos. After that, he took an L and came back and went on a bit of a run en route to a title shot against John Jones, ends up losing that fight, but does bounce back, I believe, with that win over Alexander Gustafsson, goes on a 2-fight losing skid where a lot of people were questioning his desire to continue fighting, especially considering that he still has a solid analyst spot for ESPN whenever they do, those preview shows or those recap shows or something like that. He has that going on for him. And I'm sure he has a couple other irons in the fire as well. But he did manage to bounce back with a win over Devin Clark. If you guys remember, that was a short notice main event slot. I believe, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis that ended up getting called off due to a COVID situation on fight day. And then Anthony Smith was kind of pushed up to the main event there. So good on them for being able to do that. And then he goes out there and submits Devin Clark in that first round. After that, goes out there and has a very interesting fight against Jimmy Crute. Makes a decent account of himself up until the point that he lands a beautiful kick on Jimmy Crute and it absolutely immobilizes that lead leg of Jimmy Crute, and he just has no give on it anymore. It was very difficult for Jimmy Crute to get any pressure on it, and he tried coming back out for the second round, but just could not do so. Anthony Smith, he's saying all the right things. All the interviews that I'm hearing from him, he knows that he should be beating guys like Devin Clark, Jimmy Crute, and even Ryan Spann. He kind of categorized as one of those guys. He goes, Glover Teixeira, as old as he is, and even though he was a minus 230 favorite going into that fight against him, he definitely gave Glover the due that he deserved. And pretty much let him know that, Glover is the real deal. It seemed about after the 6 or 7, actually after the 8-ish minute mark of his fight against Glover, that's where he kind of started to fall off, right? That's where we saw Glover start to land takedowns and start to get that top pressure going, and then eventually get that finish in the 5th round. Those first 2 rounds, he looked pretty good. He was landing some good shots, moving well, doing what he needed to do to beat Glover. Unfortunately for him, Glover's durability was top-notch that night, and then ultimately it was Anthony Smith who faded later in that fight, and we saw Glover go out there and get that beautiful finish from the top position. And then the Alexander Rakic fight, I believe he took that pretty quickly right after the Glover fight, and just couldn't get anything going. Alexander Rakic was beating up that lead leg of Anthony Smith and eventually parlaying that into some takedowns, and then just grinding that fight out over 3 rounds. That was one of those weird 3-round main eventers, if I'm not mistaken. It was a short notice spot as well for Anthony Smith and Alexander Rakic to bump up to a main event slot there. I feel like we were writing him off a little bit too early. Although there is some controversy regarding that last fight against Jimmy Crute, I believe there is some controversy. We did jump the gun a little bit on Anthony Smith. Seems like he still has the chops to go out there and beat guys, that are hovering in that top 15. And I believe that Ryan Spann is definitely one of those guys that he could go out there and beat. Smith, when he is on, he has good striking. His level of output could obviously be increased. That is obviously a concern. But you can say the same thing about Ryan Spann. So both these guys could just kind of be looking at each other for a while before they actually end up going out there and finding the finish themselves. But I do like Smith here. I'm not a big believer in Spann's game, right? I think he is a big power puncher. Obviously, that's how he gets the majority of his wins. There was that weird fight against Devin Clark as well, where he pretty much was not pushing, or pulling the trigger on anything for about 6 or 7 minutes, and then at some point he just said "fuck it," goes balls to the wall, finds that big shot against Devin Clark, and then quickly taps him out after that. I do think that the longer that this fight goes, the more it does favor Anthony Smith. We have seen Ryan Spann slow down in fights that do go the full three rounds, specifically that Sam Alvey fight that he had back in May of last year, where he did slow down to the point that Sam Alvey almost actually got him out of there in that 3rd round, rocking him numerous times. I think Anthony Smith is that guy that gets stronger as the fight goes on. Outside of that Glover Teixeira fight, he does go out there and put on a decent pace against his opponents, and he does find late finishes at times, like he did against Volkan Oezdemir and like he did against Alexander Gustafsson as well. I do like him here as well, and I don't mind those round 3, 4, and 5 props, as I believe that if he does get out of those early rounds, he should be able to start to take over. Ryan Spann, obviously a Fortis MMA product out of Dallas, Texas, with Save Saud. So you guys know I'm usually pretty high on Fortis guys, but Ryan Spann is not one of those guys. I truly believe he's a KO or bust type of situation here. So I do like Anthony Smith here. I think he survives that early onslaught, and then after that starts to take over, lands a couple of takedowns, and possibly gets to work from that top position. But I do think he eventually finds that ground and pound or submission finish over Ryan Spann, probably in the 3rd or 4th round of this fight. Again, a good spot for Smith to go out there and get a 3-fight winning streak going. Again, I'm not a big believer of Ryan Spann. I don't think he's super talented. I say that with all due respect. I think he is way more KO or bust than anything, and I think that we're going to see that this weekend. He's going to have to go or he's going to be pushed in this fight. He's going to have to go deep in this fight. I think Anthony Smith has great durability. He should be able to take the shots of Ryan Spann, roll with it very well, and then start parlaying into his own success the later that this fight goes. So I am going with Anthony Smith. I am going to take him to win this fight by 4th round TKO. And that's a wrap on the podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you guys haven't already, make sure you guys hit that like, hit that subscribe to support your boy. And if you want to support a little bit more, you guys can hit up the Patreon, $5 a month. You guys get great content on there. Early access to the breakdowns, best bets and props article where I go over every single fight, give you guys my best bet and prop for each fight, along with my confidence level for each bet, so you guys kind of know where my head's at. Prize Picks tips, we've been killing it over there, so make sure you guys check that out as well. Promo code UFC100 if you guys haven't checked out Prize Picks yet. They'll match your initial deposit up to $100. And the Discord community, we have a very lively Discord community, not just talking about MMA, but a bunch of other sports. So we have a lot of other tipsters on there dropping picks for other sports, so we don't have to wait for every fucking week just to talk about MMA. Luckily and thankfully for those guys in the Discord, they're able able to keep it lively for us so we can have some bets even throughout the week. So shout out to the Discord community for that. And lastly, Coolbet, coolbet.com. Use promo code MMALOTN2 and they'll match your initial deposit up to $200. And trust me, I've gotten a ton of people over there. I've gotten nothing but positive feedback. Coolbet loves using my promo code because they're getting a ton of customers off of it. So hopefully we can continue that running and show them that the MMA lock of the night community is very strong and very supportive, and that's the best way to do it. So once again, MMALOTN2 is the promo code over there at Coolbet. They'll match your initial deposit up to $200. I have a fantastic guest ready for the Ultimate Weigh-In show. I don't want to announce it yet. I will drop it on Twitter so you guys can see who it is. But another very solid coach, somebody who actually bets himself. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing his insights. But he will be joining me this weekend to break down this UFC Vegas 37 card for you guys. So that is Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you guys are already watching this and I haven't heard who the guest is, check into my Twitter. More than likely, I'll have announced it by then. It's going to be on my Twitter. But great guest for you guys on Friday. Obviously, propping you up on Thursday with my guy John. That's always a hoot to do. Giving you guys our best props bets. So yeah, make sure you guys stick around. We got a ton of content dropping on this YouTube channel. I don't think I'll be doing a live version of the Lockcast this week. I do want to get right into UFC 266 and start dropping breakdowns for that show or that event as well, so that I can get ahead, because I'm going out next week to be a part of that show, or not be a part of it, but go watch that event live. So I want to have all my work done before I fly out on Thursday. So yeah, look out for that. That's just another perk for you guys on Patreon, because a lot of that content will be dropping later this week for UFC 266 in advance of UFC Vegas 37. So check that out. All right. Good luck on your bets. Good luck on your everything. I'll see you guys throughout the week. And gamble responsibly. I got to figure out a proper sign off for this. But I'll see you guys throughout the week with all the other content that I got coming out.